PEPSI. So ever since I was little, I remember my dad with his Casio calculator watch, and I was so fascinated by that thing. He even let me borrow it one time, and I took it to school. And I thought I was so cool, and everyone was like, oh my God, you can do your math homework on this thing. Who am I fooling? If you love watches, you know that there's a Pepsi dial, you know there's a Coke dial, and these are famous watches that are loved by many people, and they have a great history. One of those key historic points in the history of watchmaking was to put two time zones on one watch. That was never done before until a special request, and Rolex answered and produced the first GMT watch, mechanical, and now that has grown into such a big market. There's GMT versions of all kinds. Of course, that GMT Master design will always be one of those most appealing designs, and of course, one of the most expensive. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy a GMT looking design. And now I want to briefly just say there are two ways to enjoy this design. One is it actually being a GMT, and two, it just looking like a GMT. Pros and cons, of course, and it really comes down to budget. Now, there are real GMT watches for affordable prices, but keep in mind, those are gonna be quartz. Making something mechanical that's GMT is always going to cost a little bit more because of the technology that goes into it, the time and production. Whereas quartz is just very straightforward in producing, cheaper to make. So I have a very interesting watch here today. This is actually one that was given to me as a gift. As I said in my other videos, watches are a way to celebrate an achievement, success. They're kind of like trophies, but you can wear them. Well, this is one of those that is never going to leave my collection because of that connection to that moment. My mom actually gave me this one when I got my first full-time job. Yes, hooray. It's not a big deal, but it was my first full-time job after studying from college, getting a master's and a bachelor's. So to her, it was a big deal for me to finally get a job in the field that I studied in. And so she wanted to commemorate that moment by giving me this watch. This is a really cool watch because it gives a nod to history, to those vintage Rolex GMT Masters. However, it is not a true GMT. And that's sad, of course, because it's funny because the bezel has the GMT markers. Let me see if I can put it on the camera. This watch has the GMT markers on the bezel. It spins, but it's not a GMT watch. So it's just for the look. And even though they could have made a GMT, that would have meant the price was gonna go a lot higher. Regardless, I love this watch, not because of the GMT capability that it doesn't have, but because it offers a lot in an affordable package with looks from the 1960s. Just really quick, I'll do some quick specs just to show you the value that this brings to the table. This is a Mathey Tissot, not to be confused with Tissot, separate companies, also old. This company started in 1886, but now they dedicate themselves to making homages of famous watches with nods to the vintage history. This being one of them, this one being called the Vintage Rolly. So that sounds funny, but it's basically that. It's a 5-digit styled case with a GMT bezel. And this one happens to have the aluminum PEPSI bezel, and I love the colors on this thing, the contrast you get. It's a black dial. It has the blue on top, red on the bottom, but it's aluminum, so you get that metallic look like a Pepsi can. The case lugs are really nicely curved. This basically follows a vintage GMT design very closely. It has the magnifying on the date, each hour marker, the 1, 2, all the way, all around. They're not, these aren't hour markers that are placed. They follow the vintage design that is just loom. And it actually has the vintage styled loom. So it's a little orangey, which makes it look old fashioned. That vintage GMT design. 20 millimeter lug, 40 millimeter diameter, 100 meters water resistant. It has a screw down crown, and it is Swiss made, which is nice. It has a Sellita 26 jewel automatic movement. So this is a Swiss made watch with a sapphire crystal. It has a domed vintage design crystal on it with that Swiss movement. So you're getting a lot for the money on this. And I believe on JomoShop, these are around 200 or close to it. You could probably find them for around that or less. They come in leather, they come on steel. I personally, so this is a Swiss made watch. I removed it from the steel bracelet, and to give it a more vintage vibe, which is what it's really trying to copy, I put it on an old looking Hadley Roma calf skin. So with this brown leather, it really complements the Pepsi dial. Not Pepsi dial, Pepsi bezel with that vintage design dial. And just overall a great looking watch. And honestly, when I got this as a gift, I still love this watch. And you forget the fact, you forgive it for the fact that it doesn't have a real GMT function. It just gives that nod of history to what that looks like. And I mean, the reality is, for the price point, they could have probably added GMT, not mechanically, but I think for the look, a lot of people in this price range aren't going to care too much about a GMT function, I think. And so they just went with the decision to not include a GMT because it's too expensive and just added the bezel. But if that bothers you, they do have designs that don't have a GMT bezel and still have vintage looks. So I would recommend taking a look at that. JomoShop is probably one of the best places to find it brand new at a very good price. And if you didn't want to dish out $200 on the spot, they have payment options. Just wanted to share that really quick, and I hope you enjoyed the images and the video. This is a watch that means a lot to me, but I really like this combination on the leather. It makes it a lot more appealing, more into that vintage vibe. Thank you so much for watching. Stick around, more watches to come.